Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. We're going to go ahead and begin our budget work session. We've got a couple minutes late, but thank you for holding up for a few minutes. We do have times that we kind of need to follow a little bit, but there'll be plenty of times for questions we can go on with them. First item is the 2015 audit. I assume
Mr. Kidney is going to present this exciting, dynamic book of facts and figures all about Lawrence. That was it.
Good afternoon. Brian Kidley, Finance Director. And before you, hopefully everyone had a chance to look at this beautiful greenish document. So the comprehensive financial report, that's pretty much the culmination of our year-end financials. And it's made up of different parts, very specific to the type of readers that we're looking for. The first part of introduction, basically the introduction to the comprehensive financial annual report is just what it is. It's just introducing to the readers what this document is meant to be. The second part is the management discussion and analysis. Management discussion analysis is trying to take a bigger view of the overall finances for the city, asking you to take a look, why did this major things move? Why is our fund balances doing this? Or why did we see gross revenues move like this? And so it's a little bit more in-depth on the analysis of what actually happened throughout the year. And then you get into the actual financial section of the city's finances. And there's two major areas to look at on that. The first part is what we call the government-wide document. And as you know, we've been through this, especially on the budget side of things, where our budget is based on a cash basis or a modified cash basis, where we're presenting to you during the budget process the amount of resources available to the taxes come in, and this is what we're going to do with the taxes. So it's very unlike a business type of accounting where it's a full accrual, where the business type accounting is going towards what is the wealth in a business. And so what these first couple reports try to do is restructure the overall city's finances of not based on what's available, but what is the wealth of a community. And I know your city auditor, Michael Glinski, has talked to you quite a bit in the past as comparing our entity-wide statements. So that's where you start bringing into the concept of depreciation. So we depreciate the street, we appreciate all of our buildings, which we normally would not do during the budget process. But that is a place that you can go to kind of get an idea of the overall wealth of the community, how well we're taking care of our assets, compare ourselves to other communities. And then from that point on, the statements are pretty much the cash basis, or at least they have a budget actual. They'll look more like you see on the budget. And then we have the footnotes to the financials within there that talks about more in depth, gives you a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. The next section is what we call statistical section, and we do a 10-year trend line on major items like the top employers, our property taxes over the last 10 years. Those kind of items you'll find in the statistical section. Sales taxes, I know Commissioner Boley and I were just talking about the sales tax item. And then this year, we added a new section way in the back. Well, first of all, I'm sorry, there's a statement of federal financial assistance, which talks about the federal grants that pass through to the city. And so we have a reporting through on that. But we've also added a continuing disclosure section in case you're wondering there's different numbers in there, and it's talking more about our utility system. Those are statements that our bondholders are looking for that we have to continually disclose to our bondholders. And so we used to do a separate report for it, and now we've combined it into this report. So that's a real quick rundown of what the overall document is in front of you. Audrey Oderman, a partner with our auditors, Mize Hauser, is here. And she was going to run through and talk a little bit more in detail on some of the reports. And then she has some required when they're not required to present this documentation to you unless they give you a presentation. And since she's given a presentation, she has some documents that she has to read to you. Also want to point out Laura Warner, who's our auditor, who you'll see her name in here also. She was definitely instrumental in putting this document together this year. So, Audrey, you want to go ahead and?
All right, it's my show. Is that
Yeah,
right? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to go through and talk about some of my favorite parts of the financial statements. And some of these parts in the financial statements I really enjoy. I think there's a lot of really useful information for you as well as your constituents. The first one is management's discussion and analysis. Brian talked about this a little bit. It's really the only place in the financial statements where we bring all of the financial information for all of the city together and compare it to the prior year. And it also gives management a really great opportunity to analyze things that changed in the year, whether it be budgeting factors, things that you decide in here, or outside factors, things that are somewhat outside of your control, but that affected the city during the year. Those pages are management's, again, opportunity to really look at those things and analyze them closely. You're going to read a lot in there about GASB 68 and the new pronouncement, and I'm going to talk a lot about that today, and you're going to see that throughout the financial statements. I'm going to address that a little bit now and explain what that is. So there's an accounting pronouncement that came out several years ago that the city had to implement this year. And what it does is it says, okay, you have Capers that has an unfunded liability out there. Capers is known for a while. It's been in their financial statements what that liability is, but it's never been allocated to its individual city school district members. This pronouncement said, okay, please figure out the allocation for each of the city entity members and have them record that liability within their financial statements for full transparency on the Capers liability. So the city received their little piece of that liability this year from both Capers and KP&F. When I say little, it's not a small amount. For Capers, the city's portion was right around $22 million for the liability. And for Capers, KP&F, it was 36.8. So throughout the financial statements, we're going to talk about restatements. We're going to talk about that liability and how it affected the net position of the city. So management has done a good job, I think, of analyzing that within management discussion and analysis. I'm going to move on to page 11 and 12. And like Brian alluded to, this is where we pull the whole city together into what's the closest thing to a business financial statement you're going to get. It shows all of the assets of the city, all the capital assets, those things like your roads and your bridges and all of your buildings. And it also pulls together all of your different debt instruments as well. And it pulls that liability into your financial statements. So you can see we present that liability as a net pension obligation about 2/3 of the way down the page. So you'll see a lot of those liabilities. You'll see a lot of different languages here about pension, deferred inflows and outflows. Those amounts are all prepared by an actuary that's hired by Capers, and they give those city those allocation amounts. What we do for the audit is we go in and we make sure that we agree with how they've allocated those amounts to the city. And we also look at the information that the city has provided to Capers, that it's valid and agrees to the system that the city uses for their accounting software. So you'll see a lot of different accounts that are new to these pages, and they have mostly to do with that pension plan liability. I'm going to move on to the note disclosures. There's a wealth of information within these note disclosures. If you really want to look at the Capers and KPF disclosures, they're new. They're on pages 40 through 44. It's a lot of very detailed analysis, and there's also a link to the Capers site that is a link where you can go to and really read an in-depth review of why the liability had to be calculated and how it was calculated. You can also get the full report and see the allocations to all of the different entities that have received a piece of that liability. And new this year, the city decided to early implement another GASB, and that has to do with tax financing programs that the city has. So any tax financing programs the city has put into place, or if the county may have put some into place that affect the city, they all have to be disclosed in the financial statements. All of our cities are going to disclose that next year because that's when it has to be disclosed. The city decided to early implement that GASB this year for full disclosure and transparency to you and your constituents. There's a lot of information about those individual programs. It's something that is going to be updated every year. And you never know, GASB may come out and add some additional disclosures to that as well, but an early implementation of that GASB for the city. The remainder of the disclosures within the financial statements are essentially very similar to what they have been in prior years. Those are the new areas that I wanted to highlight for you to review. Probably my favorite part of the financial statements is the stats section because there's just a wealth of information there. And that's on pages 85 through 112. A lot of really good trend analysis. And the nice thing about these pages is that any entity across the United States that issues a full CAFR, like the city of Lawrence does, has the exact same tables within their stats section. So you could pick up the city of Topeka, you could pick up the city of Overland Park, the city of Wichita, and see the same information for those cities and compare that to the results for the city of Lawrence across the 10 years that is required within these stats sections. I kind of wanted to highlight Table 13 on page 98, which focuses on the debt limit of the city. Shows the debt limit of the city and the debt that applies to that limit. You can see analysis over the last 10 years on what that debt limit has been. And then, like Brian said, there was the new section that the city decided to add this year. It's on page 105 through 112, and that's included in the stats section. This is very useful when you decide to go out and issue bonds, to have it within this bound copy. It makes life a lot easier for bond buyers who want to look at the information, to have it all enclosed within one document. And so that's an update to these financial statements that hasn't been there in prior years as well. Now, Brian talked about there's 3 reports within these financial statements that are auditor reports. The financial statements of the city are the city's information compiled from the city systems. These 3 reports are ours. They're probably the most riveting parts of the financial statements. Really easy to read. No, probably not really, but the first one is the auditor's report, and that's on page 1 and 2. There's a lot of talk in this report about what management's responsible for within the financial statement, what the auditor is responsible for. Talks about, again, that GASB 68 pronouncement. But most importantly, gives the opinion on the financial statements, and that's on the top of page 2. So for this year, it's an unmodified opinion, which is the highest opinion these financial statements can receive. It speaks to the work that you do as a commission every time you meet. It speaks to the work that you direct your staff to do as well, not just what we do when we come out here for the audit. So I commend the city for receiving an unmodified opinion again this year. I'm going to skip quite a ways ahead to our next letter of communication, and that's on page 117 and 118. This letter talks about the internal control work that we do when we're out here for the city. Our professional standards don't allow us to give an opinion on internal controls. However, they do require us to notify you if there's any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls that would be material to the financial statements. If you read through that letter, you'll note that we did not note any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. We also did not note any non-compliance with laws and regulations as they relate to the financial statements. Fairly boilerplate language within that letter. Moving on to page 119 and 120, this is our last letter of communication. And this letter talks exclusively about the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Anytime an entity spends more than $750,000 in federal aid, they have to have a special audit. We call it a single audit, and it's an audit of the compliance with those federal grants, as well as the supporting documentation for those grants as well. The results of that audit, you can see in fairly decent detail on page 115. There's a lot of information that says, we did not note this and we did not note that. The opinion is about 3/4 of the way down on that page, and it's an unmodified opinion. It's an unmodified opinion over that schedule, and it's an unmodified opinion over the grant that we audited this year, which is a federal transit formula grant. As you all know, the federal government doesn't generally take compliance requirements away. They add them, they modify them, there are changes that are made. There was a big change this year called the Uniform Guidance. The city did an excellent job of reviewing that new uniform guidance and making sure that they were in compliance with the new guidance. So an unmodified opinion over that area as well. And that report on page 119 and 120 goes into detail and has some very technical language about the results of that audit. If you want to see the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, it's on page 113, and it shows those expenditures by grant on those pages. Okay, it was a pleasure presenting to you today. We really like working with Brian and Laura and their staff. They do an excellent job. We do a lot of work at the individual departments. We're always treated very professionally, and they worked very efficiently to get us the information that we need, and we appreciate that very much. Can I answer any questions?
Questions?
I just have one question. On page 106, the labor force data, where it shows the last 5 years of unemployment in the city, do we have any way of calculating underemployment levels, or percentage of the city at a earning a living wage, or any way to calculate that?
Not that I'm aware of, unless we went to, let's say, an economist and hired an economist to do that for us. I don't know if KU has that. I rely on it. You can see the source there. I rely on the state labor market statistics to get that information for us, but we can look into that if that's.
Question had come up to me, so
Question.
passing it off to you.
Yeah.
In the demographics section, do you have the little chart that shows how many people come to Lawrence to work and how many people leave the city to work? Is that the chamber that has that information? That might be helpful to have in here for us.
That's actually our planning office will have that
It's our planning
information. That's
document
one of
does.
the things that we've been doing on Horizon 2020, that information is available.
Yeah, I refer to this quite a bit, surprisingly, during the year, especially the data in the back. So if we could add that in there, that would be really good, just in the future.
Stuart, you had a question?
Yeah, on page 7, the sales taxes are shown, 2014 is shown 34,791,000. For 2015, it's 25,563,000. The casual observer might think that we had quite a dip in our sales taxes, but that's a restatement of the countywide sales tax, I believe, isn't it? Which would be.
I'm still looking here.
I believe so. We've talked about that before, whether or not this would be the intergovernmental.
Okay. Is there someplace in this document where you can see what the total that the sales taxes received by the city is, that would include the cities and also the countywide sales tax portion?
No.
I don't think it's broken out that way within, let me double check.
I don't think so.
I think that would be useful information that would accompany this report.
It is certainly something that can be added.
And Commissioner Boley, you asked this last year. I acknowledge that, and I apologize that this is something I was going to add this year, and it's not in there. So I'll follow up with a statement specifically,
Great.
add to this to get to the.
I think that's
everybody.
important information for the community to see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lisa, did you have anything? No. Anything else? Other things?
Well, I might do a lead-in on what we're about ready to do on the budget. I noticed this beautiful spreadsheet over here. If you look on the CAFR, on page 57, it lists all of our special revenue funds, and it has a section that says budgeted funds. It lists it, and then it has a section called non-budgeted funds. That non-budgeted fund section is going away, and it's all going to be added to budgeted funds. And that's, so what you're seeing here are all the funds that you're seeing. Less, we have several internal service funds that you'll see in here, but all of our special revenue funds that you'll see in the CAFR now, you'll now see during the budget process. So I thought that might be a good lead in, that we are trying more to tie this document in to the budget document. And so that's why you see that spreadsheet so long, because we did add a lot of additional numbers in there. So.
Thank you, Brian. That's wonderful.
So any other questions on the CAFR?
Well, I just think it's great that you come here and that we hear how well everyone's doing around here. It's always good to hear.
And like so many things, I think we can always improve.
Sure.
I think this commission has informed the city management, the finance department, on how we can continue to improve the documents we prepare, the presentations we make. And I think the commission has had a pretty active role in that, from what I can tell. But I think the theme that I want to continue with from the CIP discussion is the theme of context. And, you know, when we presented the 5-year CIP, it was all about context. You know, when you have an item presented to you through the course of the year between budget adoptions, it can take on a priority or a distinction because it isn't in context to anything else. And I'm reminded of that as I complete my first 100-day cycle with the city, and I go out and I talk to different people. The Peasley Center, I did a tour there recently. The Humane Society, I did a tour there recently. And today I toured the Bowersock Dam project. In each case, people are describing their needs and how we fit into that need or that context. And so kind of what I'm trying to get across at this time is to let you know that as we develop these budgets and the word gets out that we're doing a CIP and we're looking at things not just in the next budget year, but on a longer horizon, people are wanting to let us know of different projects. So I think as we start down this process with a CIP and with a different budget format, that you're going to experience, you know, some additional requests that occur. And my advice to you is, after you've adopted a budget, is the answer that you need to be giving to folks is, if it can wait to the next budget year, that's when we'll consider it, after we adopt a budget. That's more difficult than it sounds like, even for me saying it and hearing me say it. Because part of the challenge is that we have to have this budget approved by early August to get it to the county and all of the requirements statutorily. And then it's probably almost 6 months before that budget takes place. And so these numbers, again, are all being put together so far in advance of the actual year that it isn't necessarily gonna capture everything everybody wants. But you're gonna have to be, kind of steadfast in your resolve not to open this thing up unless it's some level of emergency or some opportunity that you in total feel we have to move into. So having said that, I want to create kind of that message going in, but also to start with the context again. And so we're going to go through some PowerPoints. Who's controlling that, Danielle or? Okay. All right. So while that's coming up, the theme of the introduction, and I'm kind of given the 10,000 foot view, and think of this as a funnel. We start up here as the widest point, and we just keep working our way down into the details that go into this budget. And you'll hear those details by department, and you'll get into that. So the theme of this is cost drivers that impact us. And these cost drivers are such significant parts of the budget, and I'll get into percentages so you can see that. But the major cost drivers are employee compensation, obviously as a service organization. Those drive the bulk of our costs. And so really when you go to try and balance the budget, these are the things that you have to pay attention to. Related to employee compensation is healthcare. This is one of those areas where, with the commission's influence, we have now broken those down and placed those throughout the departments so you can see how they relate to individual departments. It used to be kind of categorized as a block of expense. Vehicles and equipment and debt service. So in terms of employee compensation, that's a huge driver, obviously. And so what we did is we broke this down so that you could see it as a percent of all of our budgeted funds, which comes to 34%, and then as a percent of the general fund, which comes close to 60%. By comparison, last year, the employee compensation for all budgeted funds was about $65.2 million. And you can see this year it's at 67, so it's a $1.1 million change there. Last year, in terms of the general fund, it was about 41 million. This year, it's 42,985. Health insurance. For all budgeted funds, it amounts to about 4.5%, or almost $9 million. And in the general fund, it amounts to about $5.5 million, or 7.6%. Last year, 2016, for all budgeted funds, we were at about $7.9 million. And for the general fund, we were at about $4.9 million. So you can see these roll-ups. And we're going to get into more details as we go along in those items.
I got a question.
Sure.
So there's about 25 million in employee compensation that's in other funds outside of the general fund.
Right.
So is that normal? Are those full-time employees or those part-time?
Oh, this, it's water and sewer,
Contractors.
water and sewer funds and all of that type of thing is what we're referring to when it's not included in the general fund. It's the other specific funds.
So they're still included, it wouldn't be subcontractors?
It's part of the total employment. No, that's not subcontractors.
Okay.
But that's a good point, and I'm gonna make a point exactly about that as we move along.
Okay.
Okay? So then vehicles and equipment, another big driver for us, $4.7 million, 2.4% of all budgeted funds, and about $578,000, or 0.8% of the general fund. So, having given you kind of those drivers, the other thing I want to tell you is, at this stage of the budget preparation, we're at about 1.3 million in deficit spending in the general fund. So there's three ways to balance those numbers, which the staff believes need to be balanced. You can raise revenues, you can cut expenditures, or you can do a combination of the two above, right? That's basically what it comes down to. And so by the end of this conversation, we hope to engage you and have a conversation of what you think the direction should be back to us, and we will return to you with what that might look like. But I'll add some cautions to that when we do it as well, so that you understand the implications of that kind of decision-making that you'll have. So then we get into the traditional pie charts. Again, expenditures by category and total operating budget. Again, the theme of this is drivers. And so you can see that in terms of all of our operating budgets, personal services makes up about 38.5%, or $76 million of the cost. Contractual services, and this at times includes things that may have been privatized, Leslie, other services that we may be providing through contract. And I would tell you that there's probably some economies of having, approaching these things, both of these things, keeping some things contractually, some things in terms of regular employment. And you have to find where you can achieve the most economy when you do those types of things. And there's a lot of things that, quite frankly, were privatized and probably always have been privatized in this operation. It probably wasn't even a choice. some consulting services, obviously, that would be privatization. My real point in saying that to you is that even though it's 38.5%, and that's a huge driver, some of the service-related things show up under contractual services as well. And then there's the merit pool that's plugged into that number, and non-department expenditures. In terms of non-department expenditures, as I recall, we had about $9,366,000 included in all of those. Non-department expenditures include such things as general overhead, transfers, the tourism guest tax expenses, and outside agency funding as well. So next we'll shift to what expenditures look like per category in terms of the general fund. And that's approaching 70%. That's your police and your fire and your administration and your finance and a lot of the employees that are funded out of the general fund. And so as a driver, as a consequence, when we go to try and balance the budget, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking at personnel. You're going to look at how we adjust their annual pay as one potential adjustment, or you're going to be looking at the numbers of employees that we have. And quite frankly, you know, I talked about attrition. The challenge with attrition is it may not come about in the positions that you strategically decide you do want, you don't want, you want to change, you want to modify, you want to combine someplace else. So those are all challenges with how we get to balancing that budget. And the other thing I would say is when you kind of look at these numbers, health insurance has been added, as I said, but that's not included in that employee compensation number. I think it probably is in this personnel services number. It is included in that part of the pie. So we'll keep going.
It's in the 66 point.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So next is employee compensation, and this is a decision that the commission previously made that's actually going to impact this next year's budget. So the MOUs, memos of understanding, which we have between the police and fire, those were multi-years. So the budget year 17 reflects those costs in the document itself. We also added 3% for the 17 year, and in terms of which was kind of taken off of what we did for the MOUs. And I think in talking to staff, I'm told that you were advised that usually when you resolve an MOU, there's some thought process that's going to extend to the bulk of your employees. So we used the 3%. Each percent equates to about $200,000, okay? So when you start thinking about your 1.3, every percent of adjustment for the non-MOUs is about $200,000. I'm trying to give you some metrics to understand how all this plays out as you go through it. All right, continuing on, employee compensation in terms of the public safety. The included in the 17 were the obligations that we resolved when we entered into the MOU last year. And for 17, fire and med is about a $455,000 price tag, and police is about $291,000, mainly in the general fund. There's some breakout. And so you can see how those costs have rolled forward that impact this year's budget. Now, I would remind you as well that you didn't increase the tax rate last year. So what actually happened is we reduced our fund balances and took it out of reserves to pay for those adjustments. And as you all know, with your own savings account, you can only do that for so long, and then that's not going to work. And again, to bring you into context, we just had Brian present bond issues to you in the last meeting, and we had some very successful interest rates on the bids for our bonds. And if I recall correctly, our bond advisor told you how important fund balances and reserves are when the rating agencies look at our rating, which corresponds to what kind of interest rates people are willing to bid on your bonds. So again, some context. You can't just run those balances down to nothing left. It just doesn't work, and it costs you more money in the long run. So you have to maintain that, both in terms of bond rating, but also in terms of emergency situations, so that you have backup funds to take care of things. And again, I told you what the cost was in terms of the different levels of funding. So you see a 1% pool or 2% pool or 3%, and what that actual cost would be on the general fund. The next big driver we want to talk about is healthcare. And the 2015 total healthcare plan expenses finished under budget, but we were still 10.5% higher than the 2014 budget. We made a conscious decision to spend down some of those reserves, but as I told you, we're at a point where I don't think we can spend that down anymore. And in fact, what we're recommending this year is that the employer's contribution go up by 12%, so that we maintain an appropriate fund balance. And that amount alone is almost $1 million for that, and that's plugged into this budget. That's an increase, okay? The actual total contribution is $9,138,000. So it's a big number. It's a big driver in terms of what we're doing with this budget. In addition, our employees have made a contribution, or will be asked to make a contribution. It's an overall increase in the employee contribution, which is a combination of premiums and plan design changes. Now, that doesn't equate to the $979,000. That's a 12% contribution off the employees and off some of the changes. And I was hoping Lori might be here and do you have the number?
Yeah, 570.
It's about $570,000. So it's not an equal dollar number, just so you understand that. Okay, healthcare committee recommendations. We want to increase the deductibles to $1,500 individual and $3,000 family, with out-of-pocket max increasing to $3,300 individual and $6,600 family. Do we know what they are right now this year? Somebody that's used them probably knows.
We're at $1,200 now, and $2,400 for deductibles. And then out-of-pocket maximums are $2,400 individual and $4,800 family.
Yeah. So you can see how the employees being asked to participate in the cost implications of insurance. Retiree contributions will be set once we know the stop-loss rates that are finalized in the fall, and the COBRA rates will be adjusted then too. There's no plan coverage changes suggested. We did have a suggestion from one citizen that we consider going under the state plan, and I think Lori looked at that, and we'll probably have some discussion about that. I can tell you that would probably require a pretty significant conversation with employees to make that kind of change. I think the plan that you currently have is probably a better plan, obviously, than that plan, and so I don't know that the costs are different, or what if even we can participate in that. And then the Affordable Care Act has added some cost to this as well. That's about $61,600. The next major driver I want to mention is vehicle and equipment funding, and special revenue utility funds are used for vehicles for specific ops like water and sewer, special park equipment, and solid waste. The equipment reserve fund used for general operation vehicle replacement program, and then the general fund used for police patrol, park and rec, CIP, and new programs. In terms of the vehicle equipment replacement program, it's been limited to about 500,000 with an annual need of about 1.2 million, which means that we haven't been keeping pace. And in fact, if we were to bring us up to what we as staff believe our need is, it would be about $3 million to bring it up to speed. The equipment reserve fund is funded annually from a transfer from the general fund, and the 17 budget does not have a transfer into that fund this year. Thereafter, therefore, 2017 equipment will have to be funded directly out of the operational departmental accounts as we go forward. And the different funds. Go ahead.
Right, after 2017.
After 17, yeah.
The equipment reserve fund does have $500,000 for it.
Yep.
What's identified on this slide.
So why are we doing that now? Why are we changing that?
Go ahead.
We were attempting to keep the deficit that we brought to this meeting under 1.3 million. So we could bring it to you with that transfer in, but the deficit that you'd be starting with would be 1.8 million. So it's just a matter of
What we would have come back with. That's probably the lowest hanging fruit, but it suggests to me that over time, we have some further tightening to do to get back to that situation, because it's not something that you really want to operate like that, personally. We need to build that fund up. And then this just gives you a list by fund where the equipment is being expensed from in the departments, the associated departments. Next is just a restatement of the commission priorities. And I know this was an attempt by our new commission to kind of give the staff some direction on where they wanted to focus. We kept these things in mind. When we looked at public safety, we combined that with mental health. And in fact, what we're doing in the police department is adding staffing for a CIS or a CIT unit. That's where the growth is occurring there. So we took your lead on that. The CIP was an attempt to really address infrastructure. And then if you looked at non-motorized transportation and transit, you'll notice that we've made a fairly significant effort to make a sizable contribution there. And then finally, while some would argue it's not enough, we did attempt to start to address affordable housing through the CIP as well. So we believe we've made an effort to try to follow what the commission's lead was in terms of, the priorities that you were setting. And you can always argue that it should be more. Somebody will always argue it should be less. But we tried to peg some dollars towards those goals. And then finally, the 17 budget talks about the impact of different personnel changes that we have made. In terms of fire medical, we've added, I think that was just a change. There's no dollars shown in terms of that administrative support. We'll get into all the details on these. Public Works, we're gonna talk about a right-of-way manager, fiber optic technician, and I think Chuck will be commenting on that when he gets to his budget. Here's the CIT unit. If you look at that number and then you look at the FTEs, there's also an individual at, the name escapes me, what's the name of the organization? The Burt Nash. This is actually funding an individual at Burt Nash through the city as a part of our CIT team. Water and sewer, wastewater, water sewer, that's the water fund. Those both have rate increases in water and sewer rates, and then the public stormwater also has a rate increase. So those are not part of the balancing act. We balance those with the suggestions with rate increases in those areas. And then there's some kind of repositioning of positions in planning and development services. And we'll get into those, like I said, as we get into the specific departments. Finally, debt projects, one of the other big drivers, and we've just summarized that under property tax debt and utility revenue debt, and then fee revenue debt projects. We've broken them out in that kind of category, and we can have comments about that as soon as we get into the individual departments. In terms of common, let's get into, we're gonna go to department presentations at this point, or we're gonna lead that off with, pardon? Yeah, the common themes. So healthcare, when you look at your budget document, yeah, it's the next one. Healthcare is now being budgeted at a department/division level in 17. I said that already, but we've broken it out so that it reflects the actual cost of a department-type service. Fund balance is not budgeted in 17, and grant funds were not included in 16, but are budgeted in 17. So those are the types of things that you want to keep in mind as you look at the document. They kind of explain why the numbers have changed throughout the document. And then in terms of the department overview, again, the total budget for all funds, across the operation totals $198,154,000. Actually, if you looked at previous year's budgets, I think it was over 200. And there was some issue with how we were actually counting, expenses or attributing expenses as part of that, and we've cleared that up. Finally, out of the different, then we summarized everything by category: personal services, contractual services, and again, that just emphasizes the drivers that affect the budget and really kind of impact your ability to make significant changes in terms of dollars. Again, the general fund, when you look at all things in the general fund, it doesn't show here, but out of that 198 million, the general fund equates to about $72,460,000. So with that, I think we're ready to start getting into the departmental reviews at this point. And who's up first?
The library?
No.
No, we are scheduled for 3:45? No, did that change?
Yeah, we're gonna do the library first.
Yeah, it's the library.
Sorry, we didn't have a library slide.
I know, we're always kind of left out, that's quite all right. Missing from the equation once again. No, I just got the agenda, yeah. No, and I have, what I'm gonna do if I could,
So Brad, you don't have a slide?
well, I can use what you guys are, no, we're not part of the city, we're not in your slideshow, but I can get you to some information. Yeah, that's perfect, that's all I need. Yeah, this is perfect. Okay, so I don't know how much I really need to show you this memo, but this is the memo that we sent on May 13th. My name is Brad Allen, I'm the Executive Director of Lawrence Public Library. Thanks for having me to just go over for a very brief moment what we're asking for and what our thought process is. The gist of this memo is that we are tackling two important priorities for continuing the good library services we have in this town, and those are pay equity and adequate spending on library collections. So we are asking for an increase of $300,000. This is about $3 per capita. So we like to think of it as a cup of coffee per year increase for library services. And this is our budget. What we're asking for is $4.05 million. That's an increase of $300,000 from the $3.75 million from last year. And this memo pulls this up pretty well. Basically, this money goes almost entirely to two different things. One is pay equity for our staff. We've been doing some studies on where we are at with peer libraries, and more importantly, we've been examining where libraries that are departments within cities range, where they connect with similar jobs in other cities and where we would be if we were a department in the city. I believe that's a fair way to look at what the wage and salary structure for the library should be as a governmental entity in this state. And so I could go through some of my methodology. I'll spare you that if you'd like for me to. I've gone over this with a few of the commissioners and with Tom and Brian. But essentially what we did was study where library type positions connected with jobs in other cities and then connected those to similar jobs here to build a sense of where we think we should be at and the road to get there. Actually, can I use this thing here? How would one go about that?
Push the Elmo button.
Thanks. Sure. What might be most useful is this information here.
You can zoom in.
So we have a few comps from some libraries and then what we've turned a city equivalent. And what we've done with this is shown you at 2016 where our staff is at, where staff at Johnson County Library is, where staff at Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library is. Iowa City had really good public data on their website, so we threw that in there for good measure, and then a city equivalent. And this is where we use some of our methodology to take a look at where certain jobs would be if we were part of the city government's pay structure, okay? So the first one has an asterisk by it because to my knowledge, I cannot find a single custodian 1 position in the city. There's a custodian 2 somewhere in the city that's a 903 on the pay grade. So we downgraded and assumed a custodian 1 would be in a 902 on the current pay grade, which is $13.50 an hour. And then all the rest of our positions, our main frontline position is a customer service assistant. And we believe from looking at like jobs in other cities that this is at least a 903, if not a 904 pay grade. So we use the 903 city pay grade, which would be admin support to parking meter technician, a lot of just the entry-level 903 pay grade jobs. And that's $14.62 an hour. So you can see we're at $12.75. The librarians, that comes in at anywhere between a 906 and a 908 on pay scales. Cities call things differently, so this methodology is the best that I can gather without communicating exactly what these jobs are, but these are a lot of planner jobs, accountant jobs, things like that, that a librarian 1 position connects with very cleanly in other cities. And you can see that at the city, that would be about 2010. You can see that that's kind of in the range with Johnson County and Topeka Shawnee County. The Iowa City has a union, so they're paid more. And then coordinators, we looked at to be kind of in a similar area, and we have that tagged at $23.44 an hour. And I could give you, I've got my big fancy pay plan here if you want to look at it later, if you have any questions. And I have a copy of this for you too that I can give everybody. So essentially that's our methodology, right? So the idea behind our staff increase for this year is our plan is a 3-year graduated plan to get our staff to market with city employees. And we assumed that 3 years from now, that $14.62 would be $15, which would be definitely less than 2% a year. It's 38 cents. It's about 2.5% over 3 years. That's even less than, if you did less than 1% per year, you would be at about 15, right? So we wanted, what I'm trying to tell you is at every stretch, we assumed the lowest scenario because I want you to see that we're genuine in what we're trying to do rather than trying to game numbers. So basically what we're doing is creating a process where we bring the customer service assistant to $15 an hour by 2019. There's a 75% increase per year to 2019, and then that adjusts our whole pay grade model up. So it's about 6% per year over the next 3 years. That's our goal. We're looking at it 1 year at a time. So the vast majority of our increase goes to about $250,000 goes to an increase, and then all the associated benefit increases and the payroll tax increases. To give you a sense of where we are, these numbers, people are probably sick at looking at this, but if you take a look at the per capita spending at libraries that are over 40,000 people, in Kansas, we consistently rank 7 out of 9. I don't ever anticipate, nor do I think we ever need to be at $97 per capita like Topeka, but certainly national averages are right here in these low 50s to 55. The national average is 53. Just to give you some context and some other context, if you look at there are 331 public libraries in Kansas, and we rank 158. We have the same per capita spending as Winchester. We're 97 out of 186, over 1,000, over 5,000. So I wanted to show at every different level, we're kind of right there in the middle. And I'm not suggesting we should be exactly at the top, but I was curious how this would work. And libraries are well-funded and poorly funded throughout the spectrum of every size of library in this state. It's amazing to me that over 100 libraries have served less than 1,000 population. It's pretty crazy. The second thing that we're looking to do as we've been studying this is we very much need to increase our spending on electronic books and materials. We have been holding our collection line at $550,000. It's been between $540 and $550 for about 8 years. In those last 8 years, a Kindle was created and the ebook revolution has hit us. And our spending, it's very difficult to us to decrease the print spending because that is not really decreasing that much. And we're not being able to adequately fulfill the need for e-content for our community. I thought this would be interesting too. I just pulled these numbers today from the state public library survey. And this gives you an idea of per capita spending on collections. And you can see we're 7 out of 9 there in the biggest cities. This is similar to the other you've seen, although Hutchinson is quite high per capita on their spending. And we fall kind of wonderfully in the middle here, but just some things to think about when you're looking at where we should maybe be in our spending. If you look at national averages, the national average is somewhere in the high 6s to low 7s per capita, so we're about 20% off of that. If you use that as a metric, we should be at about 640,000 in our collections, and we're at 579. So we're asking for an additional 50,000 that brings us from 550 to 600,000. It's about a 9% increase. To give you an idea, the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library spends more on e-content than our entire materials budget. Just for some context on their ability to spend and make an impact. Granted, they serve 170,000 people instead of 95, but still we're considerably far off on making this happen. The 60 ebooks that we bought in the last 30 days, 54 of them are checked out. So there is demand for e-content, and we really need to up our game, and it will be difficult to cut print collections to do that. I feel like I kind of overtalked this, but that's the $300,000 right there. It's getting our staff to what we see as a living wage. It's something that I believe is a social justice issue, and frankly, an economic development issue. As we pay our staff better, they're able to buy things in town. They're able to afford their rent. They're able to not have to apply for affordable housing. I think these are important things, and I think it's important that we come up to the wage that city staff are at, and it's just something that has been a long time coming, and something that we asked the city commission to consider. I think those are pretty much all I have to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions that y'all have.
Employee benefits, are they pretty much equal to the city employees and what they get?
I have no idea, because I've never asked anybody at the city what Their benefits are, do you mean like health insurance?
Can you provide for us a typical benefit package to an employee? What all is included in there? You don't have to do it right now.
Sure, yeah, I mean, our frontline staff, is frontline staff 17 days of vacation or is it 12? Coordinators have 20 days of vacation. I think we're closed 10 holidays. If you are a full-time employee, only half of our employees are full-time. That's another, to Matt's point, I think we have an underemployment issue at the library as well. We have a lot of people who leave through attrition because we can only afford to give them a 25-hour-a-week job. So we lose a lot of people from not being able to have more full-time jobs. But if you are full-time, we pay for healthcare, which is just a pretty standard Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, and we pay 60% of anything for any children or spouse or anything like that.
Okay. If you could provide that, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Capers.
Other questions? Okay. Nope, Tom?
Brian, can you talk about the mill levy that's included and how much that's gonna cover? And I think the other thing that we need to have Brad do is sit down with personnel and just compare those fringe benefits back and forth. And then look at the employees that you're suggesting are in comparable pay plans in terms of duties to see if our ratings would align with those in terms of your argument.
Yeah, my guess is if Springstead did the study for you guys, my guess is they have safe score numbers for both, and you could smash them together if they allowed both. Yeah,
but I think it would be good to have you sit down with our staff and walk through those numbers so that there is some understanding of what you used for purposes of comparison that way.
We'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I will point out Springstead. They only did the study for the library, not for the city.
Okay, they haven't done one for the city in the past. It's an inward to the city.
How about the mill rates?
Oh, the mill rate. I believe it's currently 3.77.
I think the mill rate that we're using is flat, isn't it?
Right, so the city has not increased the mill levy for the last couple of years. You're under a city-imposed charter ordinance to limit the mill rate for library services at 4, plus any mill rate over 4 up to 4.5. The difference between the 4 and the 4.5 would be for employee benefit costs. Again, we haven't really spoke too much about that part of the budget request. I believe the budget request that they're asking would bring us up to that 4 mills, if not just a tad over that 4 mills. So if the city were to decide to honor or bring them to their budget request, there could possibly be a need to do a charter ordinance to do that. However, maybe not because of the employee benefit portion of it, but it would definitely be, we'd be at that 4 level if it were at there, which would get us to the limit. Again, it's a charter ordinance. Diane, I know we looked at it a little bit, whether or not they would, at the charter level, whether or not that's a simple motion to change that level within the charter ordinance.
Okay.
I would have to ask the city attorney on the exact detail how to amend that charter ordinance.
But I think Brad is intending to make adjustments for 3 years to bring them up to what you determined to be the appropriate wage, right? Wasn't that your plan?
Right, yeah, I mean, this is really just year 1 of
Yeah.
3 of
And so here's
some.
the point I'm making, that if that's to occur, we're gonna have to address this mill levy issue.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it's a city-imposed mill levy based on the charter ordinance.
Right.
There's not a state mill levy that's attributable.
I'm trying to make sure the commission understands what they're looking at in terms of this request.
Sure.
Okay.
Brad, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just give you guys these handouts.
Yes. Run the transit part. I'm gonna-
You're in charge.
I'll be back. we're gonna try to get her more of those quotes. It's pretty bad.
Thank you, Brad. Now we have transit next.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Our budget, as is presented, is really, the majority of it is under contract services, under commodities. That's the two major components of it. Our revenue sources are coming from either federal dollars, state dollars, or from the transit fund that's out there. There's not a lot of change in this year's budget compared to last year. Part of the reduction in the use of the transit fund is a little bit of reduction in what we had committed to last year, because we were thinking we would end up with a transit center. We'd have to ratchet up our service in order to provide service to the transit center. So we pulled that back a little bit, although this year we are going to increase our service on a few more routes, on Route 1, 7, 3, and what was the other one? 10. We've already rolled out additional service on Route 7, which we rolled out at the beginning of the summer. We're going to roll out Route 10 this year, so that's hitting on this year's budget, but it wasn't necessarily considered into next year's budget. So in brief, that's where we are. There's not, as I say, there's not a lot of change in our budget. It's gone down. A lot of it's contingency, which was a fund balance from the previous year. So the other thing that we do have in our budget is, right now, we get funds from the state. We get about $1 million from the state. Of those $1 million, half of that is really the universities, because we use their data and their ridership in order to get funding. So we kind of share that $1 million between them. One of the things that we have done is kept $180,000 in the budget as kind of a placeholder in case KU wants to buy some vehicles or something out of it. So that's in there to kind of cover for them. So other than that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? I got a question. On the slide but behind this one, I believe it was, go back one.
There you go. This one?
Yeah, this one. Yeah, your total, is a huge jump between 2016 and 2017, and I don't think I quite heard the explanation of that. So if you could repeat that, that would be great.
Contingency it shows a lot of it. We've found we've made up some in budget out of fuel. Right now we go with KU, we get a joint fuel purchase. After they purchase it, we purchase off of that. We use a lot of fuel. The fuel savings we had last year and what we're assuming will happen this year is pretty large.
Why isn't that under commodities then? Wouldn't fuel be
that
under
is
commodity?
actually, that's a $216,000 of savings we were expecting out of fuel.
The contingency, what's the?
The contingency was a fund balance, is what it was. So, I mean, that's a difference of $3 million. It was for, I'm not sure what.
I might go
That was
ahead
more.
and, again, one of the overview slides that Tom just had, and then we had the library in between there. So in 2016, the budget included year-end fund balance. There's an operational way to report it to the state. And so this is an example of 2016 budget. The total budget, including fund balance, was $7.8 million. That $3,334,000 literally was the planned fund balance. For the operational budget that we're presenting this year, we're taking all those away because we want to get to the point of what is it that the governing body, what is it we're actually going to spend in 2017. So you're going to see this slide after slide, unfortunately, where you'll see a contingency amount in any fund type. And public transit is its own fund. And so you're going to have that. Now, when you get into the department expenditures in the general fund, you necessarily won't have that. But when you get into recreation fund, utilities fund, it'll be a huge one. So you'll see that from time to time. And we weren't really sure the best way to present that, so we thought, well, we'll present it just the way it was adopted last year, and 17 shows it the way we're going to do it. So that contingency fund, that line item just literally is last year's fund balance that we're just not showing this year as an expenditure. So is that?
Any other questions?
So when we see the budget, when the city manager presents our budget, on the general fund page where it shows expenditures and revenues, it will not have a line of fund balance at the bottom. All of that is going to be into the individual budgets, correct?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
So I
So-
won't ask where it went.
Well, again, we don't plan to spend the fund balance,
Right.
so it didn't go anywhere. It's,
But tracking wise, it will be within the individual department budgets. That's it.
it'll be in individual funds,
Okay.
yeah. So, yeah, and next week, when we bring forward the fund summaries, you'll see where those fund balances end up, and it'll tie, the 2017 expenditures will tie to the expenditures you're seeing tonight, and then we'll have a balance, fund balance, that we're trying to keep at those levels. So, again, I apologize about the 16 and 17 columns are a little bit, even the departments were struggling with it a little bit. It's like, wait a minute, what's this 3 million? So,
Thanks,
that's it.
Brian.
Other questions? Thank you, sir. We are on to the city manager's office.
Okay, and I'll give the quick rundown of the city manager's office. This budget is just general fund budget. Obviously, we're not including transit in the budget you see here, but we are including the rest of the city manager office department functions. Those include fourth floor city management team, human resources, risk management, the city clerk's office, communications, arts and culture, and economic development. So we house several functions within this department budget, and they're all going to be presented together here in the chart that you're looking at. Essentially, the budget is pretty much flat. You'll see a cost increase in personal services. That is, again, for the health insurance premiums that were not budgeted in 2016 at the department level, but they are budgeted here in the city manager's office budget for 2017. And you'll see that discrepancy in each of the department budgets that you look at today. In total, those health insurance costs equate to $173,000. So that's a big chunk of that. The remaining $86,000 or so is other personal services costs. The only other change that I would point out is in our contractual services and commodities line items. We shifted about $16,000 from contractuals to commodities and risk management in that division budget to appropriately allocate where our IT system for risk management is funded. That reduction in contractual services is offset by increases in some of our insurance premiums. Risk management is where we fund all of the city's liability insurance and stop loss insurance out of. The other departments, there's really no budgetary changes of significance to point out. So that being said, I'm happy to follow up with any questions you may have about it. Yes, ma'am.
But the asterisk down here says additional personnel services budgeted in the water utilities fund.
Right. So in the past, we have not, or the budgets have not included at the departmental level the portion of a few of our FTEs that are split. And so what you see in personal services here includes, and I'm going off the top of my head, but I believe it's half of the city manager, half of each of the assistant city managers, and then there's one other FTE in the clerk's office that is only half funded out of general fund. That other $171,000 is funded out of the water utilities fund. So it's the city manager's office and the city auditor. In both of those department budgets, you'll see that asterisk.
So it's just charged to that fund?
It's charged to that fund, and it's reflected in their personal services budget.
As well as their pay?
Right, yeah. We didn't want to double count it, and I mean, we wanted to provide the full picture, but we didn't want to double count it, so,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Brian, let me ask again, just my own peace of mind. Under personnel services or personal services, is there a wage adjustment in that number?
So those would be the 2017 projections. Are you talking about the merit pool?
Right. They're reflected in those numbers in the 2017 budget?
Yes. No, I apologize, no. That would not include the merit pool number.
Okay, so none of those are going to be in this until we make our recommendation on that.
The 3% that city manager referred to is in our general overhead department.
Okay.
And so the idea is if it was then adopted in the next year as merits were done through at the end of the year, then those budget adjustments would be made into each of the departments. But until that time, these are, do not reflect a raise, except for any of the departments that had an MOU increase, and those departments would have the MOU increase.
So when we get to general overhead, that's where it's going to be?
Right.
Okay, got it.
And Mayor, on that point, I would just point out, we don't need to back up clear to this, but on slide 3 in the overview of cost drivers that Tom presented earlier, we did show an employee compensation number with an asterisk, and I believe up here there was a typo in there. It said it does include the merit pool,
Right,
but it
that's
does
what I
not.
wanted to make sure. Okay,
Right, yeah.
got it.
So,
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Brian.
whoops, my fault.
It is time for,
Brian, you're up.
Mark Heim, Assistant Finance Director, and I'll speak on this part because Brian, I think, feels like he's probably going to get to speak plenty, so thank you. And I would probably say, I'll start off by saying, again, we're at the same issue for us. The biggest changes you'll see in our budgets, the two different funding sources are the health insurance is now showing up in our budget. So we have about, I don't know if you want to flip to the next slide, and I'll show you so here, personal services in our operating fund, $67,000, you'll see the increase. That's about 65 of that is the health insurance. So it's a big increase, obviously, but that, again, you're going to hear that throughout. And other than that, our budget's pretty flat here. The main thing I would just say is we just tried to follow the guidance of our IT department, costs of software licenses, things like that. IT maintenance go up a little bit every year, so they help guide us on, hey, plan on, a little bit higher costs for these things, and that's what we use as our projections. So pretty straightforward on the operating fund, I think, and, I just have the comment at the bottom about the recruiting, training, something Brian's talked about since he got here. We'd like to be able to get our staff out a little bit, especially like our customer service employees you'll see in the next slide. But we'd like to be able to provide more of that, get them out, even if it's a day or 2-day training. And it's just been a little bit of a challenge right now. But so we try to allow just a little bit for that. So it's kind of the rundown of the operating fund. And, okay, on the water and sewer, again, biggest increase there on personal services, $50,000 of that's the health insurance. In this fund, the one thing I would say is in contractual services, we have $150,000, and that's for credit card processing fees, so the merchant processing fees. So just maybe a really simple example, you come into City Hall, you want to pay with your credit card, we have a $3.25 charge, which is a big deterrence kind of for people who want to use that credit card, because that's can be pretty steep depending on what your bill is. You go into the grocery store, they don't say your bill is $100 plus you owe us another $3. So this was talked about last year and then planned for this year to cover that, to encourage credit card use. We've talked with different merchant processors and consultants who said you're going to see your credit card use really take off. this will really encourage people to use credit cards. So again, I don't know of anything else I would point out necessarily. I'm happy to answer any questions if I can. Pretty flat in the commodities, capital outlays. So.
I guess the question would be, is the MasterCard fees, the credit card fees, when we did our calculations for rates, was any of that figured into those rate figures?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Okay. Now we've got information technology. Jim?
Mayor, Commissioners, Jim Wisdom from the IT department. Our department's very small, very lean on the finances, but small variance. If you wouldn't mind going to the next page, the biggest difference there in the personal services, of course, is the healthcare cost. And on contractual services, we've had we are currently in the process of replacing some of our phone systems. This year we replaced the City Hall's phone system, the 2 police departments, the 3 water plants, and several other buildings. Most of those phone lines have been moved over to the VoIP, which is SIP trunk lines, and we're still paying for some of the older, we still have to pay for some of the older trunk lines until we get everything moved over. So we have a little bit of duplication of expenses there. So there's been a lot of savings actually through the switch over, but most of that has been realized in some of the departments where we've replaced some lease lines with fiber or reduce some of the phone costs. So other than that, everything else is very similar. So do you have any questions? Or
We're not switching everything over to voice over IP, are we?
No, we had a 30-year-old phone system here in the building, and it supported both police departments and water plants and other places. So to replace that, we had to do that. So where it makes sense, we are, but a lot of the outlying places that we have that just have a few phones, it doesn't make really sense to do that.
Yeah, I'm a little worried because KU, of course, did that, and then it seemed like the next week, their fiber was cut, and then they didn't have any phone lines. So it's very, I don't know. Is there a redundancy? I guess I don't know about that we could build in if we did that.
KU is working on a redundancy, and we are also working on a redundancy with them.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
I don't want to put us in the same boat.
Yeah.
Just to speak up on that issue, a lot of times the phone copper wires are buried right along next to the fiber too. We've experienced a cut just a couple weeks ago where both copper and fiber were cut by the same backhoe. So.
Yeah, it happens.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Good, thank you. Good afternoon, Mark Bradford, Fire Chief. In the overview slide, you have the general operating fund of an increase of just shy of $3 million. And again, like others, that's partially covering the healthcare. Equipment reserve is down by $600,000. And capital improvement, we have $520,000 requested there. Specifically in the operating fund, personal services, again, out of that 2.8 million, 2.3 of that is memorandum of understanding. We had additional steps, if you recall, approved in the memorandum for 2017. 2018 and 19 then would include some pay differences. The 1 FTE that the city manager discussed is being requested by Douglas County, and they would pay 100% of that position, salary, benefits, overtime. They're currently doing that for 2 medical claim specialists. We're adding another medical claim specialist.
So they would work under our department?
Right, they're city employees, but we bill the county for those costs on a quarterly basis. Contractual services, we have a slight increase of $426,000. That's predominantly for building maintenance, vehicle leases, employee education for hazmat and technical services, and supervisory training as directed by HR. And commodities with a slight increase driven by the increase in cost of personal protective clothing and the amount of time that we need to recycle those, and then firefighting foam. So a total increase request of $2.8 million and some change. In the equipment reserve fund, we have really two items. One is a new breathing apparatus fill station or air compressor for breathing apparatus for fire station number 1. It's replacing a 1993 compressor. We're just having a difficult time in keeping it maintained to provide sufficient safety quantities of air. And then partial funding for an apparatus, and $100,000 is being allocated from the sales tax, infrastructure sales tax fund, and then the balance of that for the truck that really you've already approved would come from a general obligations bond. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Pretty straightforward. Thanks. The police overview.
I'll wait with them too.
They said give all the money to the fire.
Exactly.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Chief?
If you look at the next slide, which is that one, there's the meat and potatoes of our budget. Just want to draw your attention to the variance. So the 2017 budget looks significantly higher than the 2016 budget, but there's a couple of reasons for that. If you look at the personnel services, it shows an increase of $2.8 or $2.9 million. However, $2 million of that is the health insurance transfer that I think you have been briefed on already. So that's a big significant part of that. $610,000 of that is the budgeting of the overhires into 2017. That was something that I think you guys told Tom and I to make sure we put that in there. So the real variance is $282,000, which would represent new services or new stuff. And that's going to be projected salary increases for staff and officers, and then a slight increase in the overtime budget. So that's the explanation for that variance in that line. If you look at contractual services, variance there is $1.2 million. Some of the things that are adding to that aren't necessarily new things, but just transfers of responsibility to the right place in the budget. We've got the Judicial Law Enforcement Building, or LEC, maintenance contract was in Public Works. It's about $72,000 that's added to that. Prisoner care is a big one. That's what we pay the jail, daily fees. That was in municipal court budget. Now it's going to be in ours. That's about $650,000. And then there's the mental health team request that I put in a proposal for a couple officers, a civilian co-responder, and a sergeant to deal with the very, very serious needs in the community now as far as CIT and upping our game there. And we can go into detail on that if you have specific questions. But that's the meat of the contractual services additions. So if you subtract that out, you're left with $121,000. That'd be kind of the real additional part in the budget, and that increase is due to annual software maintenance contracts, emergency room charges for arrestees. State law changed last year where government entities that bring in arrestees with injuries, if they don't have insurance, we would have to pay for that. So that those charges are going up. We're going to be rebidding a dry cleaning contract. That's kind of an old contract, so I expect the price to go up there, and increases in the radio equipment contracts. So the next line down is commodities. Oops, sorry. And if you go back one slide, Diane, thank you. But anyways, the budget variance there is $135,326, and that's due to replacement of bulletproof vests, taser equipment, recertification of officers, some replacement of community equipment, uniforms, replacement equipment, and personal equipment allowance as negotiated by the MOU group. Capital outlay, the variance is $169,000. That represents upping an allotment for patrol vehicles. So normally we'd only get 8 or 9 a year, and the budget there would be about 260. I'm asking for 392, so that's part of it. A couple replacement vehicles in some of the support divisions that are roughly 15 years old. And then purchase of new pistol holsters and ammo for some of the new pistols that we're going to be getting. So that's where that additional money is represented in those budgets. Thanks, Diane. If you look at the parking system, personnel services, again, that variance, you add about 11,000, so 8,000 of it is health insurance that's billed to that line item now, and the remaining balance of about $3,600 is projected salary increases and some overtime. There's a capital improvement in there as well, and that's going to be for the new pay stations. Okay, the New Hampshire and Riverfront Garage pay stations need to be upgraded. That's about $83,000, and then the printer and ticket writers for the pay stations is about $16,000. So you have about a $99,000 request there. I think the last slide is just the trust fund, and that's just showing you the balance of what's in the law enforcement trust fund, which are seizures, both state and federal levels. Questions?
Chief, thank you much.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Commissioners.
City Attorney's Office.
Hi, I'm Tony Wheeler, the city attorney. Tony's actually enjoying a hard-earned vacation right now, so I'm gonna try to fill in for her, but there's nothing like the real thing. As you can see, Tony really prioritized keeping her budget as flat as possible. In fact, the whole city attorney's operating budget represents about a 7% reduction. So there were a few increases here and there in some of her non-personnel costs, commodities and contractuals, but most of those were offset by reductions in overtime and part-time personnel costs, our budgets. There's a big overall reduction in contractual services, as Chief Khatib just mentioned. Our prisoner care costs are now going to be budgeted out of PD. So we shifted in 2016. Those costs were $385,000. 2017 we're budgeting $650,000, but those are no longer going to be in the city attorney's office budget. The health insurance, and I'm sorry, I'm skipping around on lines here, but the health insurance costs for personnel represents $215,000 out of the personal services increase. So that's pretty much entirely just the health insurance premiums. And then the last point that I wanted to make about this budget was that the draft CIP was presented to you a few weeks ago with the municipal court security project in it. That was, I think, about $140,000 project to install or to equip that facility with adequate security features. And this is in light of the upcoming start date with the new legislation for carrying weapons, concealed carry, in municipal buildings. So we ended up, after some deliberation, we ended up backing that out of the CIP, so you're not going to see that in their capital outlay budget. So that is one thing I did want to point out to you, and I'll try to answer any questions that I can that you may have about this budget. We also have Maria Garcia and Vicki Stanwicks, I believe, is also here to help me out.
Please.
I know that at one of our criminal justice coordinating council meetings, we were talking about electronic monitoring, and that might help somehow. Is any of those costs already added into that?
Oh, electronic monitoring.
Thank you. This is from November.
No, not,
November.
no.
They're not
No, they're
already?
not in.
Okay. Because of course, we're hoping to see some kind of cost savings with that, but I don't remember for sure if that was more county or city that saw the cost savings, so.
And I'll look into it. We'll just double check, go back and look at the accounting system. just to
Yeah,
make
because they were looking at house arrest perhaps too, which would be cheaper
Right.
than,
Yep, yeah, we'll follow up with you about that.
let me pass this down. I can't email right now.
Other question?
If I might, I just want to reiterate, both in the city attorneys, where you saw the city attorneys' contractual services go down,
Right.
police went up. We're transferring the jail fees from attorney's office to the police department. That's in preparation for 2018 tax lid, where we'll be able to exempt from the tax lid public safety expenditures, and so we're preparing for that by getting everything in the general fund that's associated with public safety into the funds, or into the departments that would be exempted. So it's just kind of preparation, getting ready for the 2018. Plus, it makes sense to have those costs in there.
That's the $373,000 figure, correct?
Yeah, that's why you'll see the city attorney's commodities drop, and then it went up roughly the same amount in the police department.
Okay.
And that is all within the general fund budget, so.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
City auditor and city commission.
Nope. Sorry. There it is. Not much to say about this. It's basically the same service level as previous years. The reduction in contractual services is because there's not that funding for the audit of the auditor that is required every 3 to 3.5 years. The other thing that I guess is worth noting is that some of the personal services is budgeted in utilities department. So this isn't all of the personal services. But. Any questions?
City, yeah, go ahead.
Is that just one person, or,
Mhm.
so it's 9.2% change?
Yeah, and that is primarily, I think, the allocation of the health insurance.
Oh, okay.
Is that, yeah.
Okay, go to the city commission general operating fund then.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
good
Mark.
afternoon. I'm going to present your budget. There is not a lot of change with it. The big variance that's seen in personal services is due to the healthcare, which we've seen in a lot of other funds. So it seems like a big percentage, and that's because it's a relatively small budget, but that is all due to the healthcare being budgeted at the department level. And the other notable change is in the contractual services, and that increase is due to an increase in travel expenditures that's been budgeted for in 2017. So with that, do you have any questions?
So healthcare takes additional $45,000?
Yeah, healthcare is actually $46,800, so a couple of the other personal services categories went down, and that made up that big difference.
83% increase?
Yep. Mike, no hard tax.
Yeah, I can't afford to get sick. Anyway, okay.
3,300 out of pocket now too.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll tell you what, we're ahead of schedule.
We are, that's what I was just
Why don't we
reviewing.
go ahead and continue to go? We got everybody
Mhm.
here, and
Yeah.
is that okay with you, other members of the commission?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and go to utilities department. Dave?
Mayor and Commissioners, Dave Wagner, Director of Utilities. I think part of the things Brian mentioned, I think that is a common theme here that's important to realize is that we're no longer funding fund balances at the year end, so you'll see a significant reduction in the budget. I'd love to be able to tell you we're doing a 25% reduction and elevating our level of service, but regrettably, that's not the case. We are having impacts. If we can go to the next slide, this gives you the overview, but I think the things that I think you're relatively aware of is we're bringing on a new facility next year, potentially as early as the third quarter, with the additional wastewater treatment plant at the Wakarusa. So the significant changes in our budget are directly related to that, both in personnel services for an additional 4 FTEs for the Wakarusa facility, plus as well as additional commodities, electricity, the chemicals it's going to take to run that facility, plus some additional equipment. We'll be moving between 4 major plant facilities instead of just 3. So there's a few additional vehicles to increase our fleet size that's included into this budget. That is obviously the major driver. I like to give you what you're going to get for the bang for the buck out of that thing is when that plant starts up, 2 million gallons of wastewater that are being treated today at the existing facility will be treated at the new facility. That's a significantly higher level of treatment than what we do at the existing facility. So the nutrients that are currently going to the Kansas River and back into the environment, they'll now be stripped out and beneficially reused on land. So it's an environmental, regulatory driver, plus an environmental responsibility thing that we're going to be getting out of that. So that's a major thing. The other FTE that we've included in there, we talked earlier a little bit about our initiatives to get out to the customer and talk about water quality in their home a little bit more than we've done in the past. One of those FTEs would be programmatic enhancements to allow us to do that to a higher degree. Specifically, the driver for that is one driver for that is lead, but we think we can do a better job about that in all water quality parameters, not just as it relates to lead. So we've included that in this year's budget. I think, as mentioned before, that is included, the support of this is included in the rate structure that you've already approved, the changes for 2017, which is about, for a typical resident, 7.8%, I believe, which is an impact to a typical customer of about $48 a year increase over what their rate is for this year. So again, the large decreases are the fund balance transfers or the fund balances that are no longer distributed into the budget. I think on the next slide simply shows that we have a non-funded construction fund that we use to do some capital work with as well. But it just represents what's going on with that fund, I think, for the year. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so how many people does it take to run the new plant?
We will have a total of new staff over what we've already acquired, and at the end of next year, an additional 10 positions, I believe. And that was included in the rate plan from 2013 through 2017.
Okay, that was
staff expansion.
Okay.
So when you switch over, will the old plant, will that continue to be used, or?
Absolutely. You know, obviously, we'll have more capacity at that plant. You know, and the way we've designed the facilities is we can move some of the flows to either one, not all the flows, but some of the flows. So as growth occurs, we'll be able to adjust to some degree which plant gets that capacity or which goes through which treatment process. So both whether wet weather or dry.
Will that still be discharged into the Kansas River?
The new plant discharges to the Wakarusa River.
And the old plant to Kansas River?
The old plant to the Kansas River.
What else?
I suppose we're not in any way breeding Zika mosquitoes at our water treatment plants, right? I can't help but think of that map that has the Kansas River.
I'm not going to guarantee you around a wastewater plant there aren't some bugs.
Right.
But you know, open water body, you know, stormwater detention ponds, they're all subject to that growth.
I'm a little concerned about that, truthfully.
So, not my area of expertise.
Right.
We do the other bugs in the aeration basins that we call bugs, but they're kind of a different kind of bug. So.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
You know, I did have a question. Because we have times next to these, are these advertised and we should follow these fairly closely? No? Okay.
I can take up the next hour. How much do you want to talk about?
No, you can't.
I don't think you want us to talk for an hour.
Just bring it up just in case. Purpose of advertising. Okay.
Maybe you want to rethink that.
All right. Looks like
Public works.
efficiency is better, brevity is better.
Public works.
Right, I can think of one right off the top.
The general public works overview, we'll skip on to the next one and get more into the details. So our general operating fund, that basically includes a lot of our personnel, street, traffic, engineering, airport, levy. We have asked for a new fiber technician. We have 7,500 miles of fiber strands that we have installed within the city. That's not including the additional vacant conduits that we have out there. We are using our traffic personnel, basically, to do the maintenance on it, and that means they can't maintain the traffic signals, so it's kind of like a domino effect. We're asking for one more full-time person, be housed with our traffic division, to be able to take care of our fiber maintenance needs. We're also asking to include some equipment that goes along with that, a trailer and some fiber splicing equipment in the capital outlay. Commodities, we've asked to replace about $150,000 for salt. It's about 5,000 tons. We use about 5,000 tons a year. We had a light winter, but we don't want to be without. We've got a lot of stockpiled out at the farmland right now. But what happens is if we have a heavy winter and we end up using the salt, then everybody piles up at Hutchinson, and it's just a big long line, and it's, you know, it only comes out so fast, so everybody waits. So we'd like to go ahead and replace the $150,000 worth of salt that we've used up this last year. And then again, obviously the personnel costs, the shift of the healthcare to the division budget, that makes up the rest of that with our new fiber technician person. I do want to mention in the commodities, in this general operating fund, is $1,750,000 for our street maintenance program. We've got another $200,000 in our gas tax fund, $140,000 in our stormwater fund, and then $800,000 in our infrastructure sales tax fund, which you'll see as we go through the slides, for a total for next year of $2.89 million for contracted street maintenance. That doesn't include the infrastructure sales tax program, which is an addition. So move on. This is the infrastructure sales tax plan. The big projects on there are Castle from 6th to 15th, Wakarusa from Legends to 6th, and then there's a couple $100,000 for bike ped improvements, and again, I mentioned the $800,000 for street maintenance. So that equals all that. Then there's the $500,000 for vehicle replacement. That is in the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, but not necessarily in the infrastructure sales tax plan. So I just wanted to mention that. Want to move on? Our special gas tax fund, that has some of our, this is mostly people and equipment, has our street division personnel, stormwater personnel. Again, some of the change there. Well, actually, this fund, the special gas tax fund, you can see a decrease in the personnel costs, and part of that is because our healthcare cost was always carried in that fund. So we don't have that increase that you've been hearing about over and over and over. Commodities, we've added $100,000 for contract milling. That's really for our in-house street maintenance staff. We don't have milling capabilities, but they can do some overlays, some smaller projects. This way they would be able to do better projects with in-house staff. Question?
When you finish this, I'd like to take your back slide, please.
Okay. Capital outlay, $150,000 for ITS video detection equipment. Basically, we have about 100 signals that we maintain in town. The video detection cameras are old, and they need to be replaced. So this would start replacing some of those. Commissioner Bowley, what was your question?
On the previous slide, on the capital improvement reserve fund, infrastructure sales tax, what are the CIP projects that are It says capital outlays, Castle, 615, Walker's, Legends the Sixth, bike path improvement, street management. Are those the CIP projects?
Those are all the projects.
Are there other CIP projects that are listed there?
No, those are them for
That's it.
2017.
Yeah, okay.
Our solid waste fund, again, in the healthcare part, the solid waste fund has always had its healthcare budgeted in the solid waste fund. So you can see a decrease there. And part of that decrease is because as people retire, they're paid at a higher salary, and we're hiring in and moving people up. So there's a slight decrease there. In commodities, you can see a percentage reduction that reflects the savings in fuel. Capital outlay is basically our truck replacement. We replace trucks annually to keep the fleet safe, and we move to more automated trucks every year. We are going to talk about a rate increase. I think that's at another agenda study session, or another next week. But we are proposing a 3% increase. And a lot of that is because landfill fees are going to go up 3.5%. That's by contract. Recycling rates will be going up, we assume, about 3%, and personnel costs. Our construction fund, solid waste construction fund, that's basically for phase 2 of our Kresge facility. Is that next week?
Contract for engineering design.
Yeah, contract for design is on next week, but we have that money available for the phase 2 that's out at the Kresge facility. It's next to the household hazardous waste facility that just opened up. Our public parking, we have 3 parking garages, New Hampshire, Riverfront, and Vermont. About every 5 years, we try to do a structural assessment of those facilities. We usually contract that. We go out for proposals on that. The last couple of years, it's been Walker Parking. So that's a pretty big project that we contract out. Electricity for the Vermont parking garage, that just came online in 15, so we didn't know what the costs were for that, so that's in there. And then New Hampshire parking garage stair replacement. Those are the causes for the increases. The airport improvement fund, basically, the costs here are for capital improvements out there. We got a $150,000 grant from KDOT to do rehabilitate taxiway C, which is on the agenda next week as well. No, that's on tonight for the commission's approval to accept the $150,000. It's a $15,000 match. And then we have the wildlife fence, which is also a 90-10. It's a $900,000 project. We have to come up with $90,000. So over 16 and 17, that's what the increase is.
Hey, Chuck, can you go back to the parking? Have we talked at all about raising fines or fees? I assume none of that
We've talked
potential
with
is in
the
there.
chief's not here. Anyway, we've talked about that with, and it goes to the downtown parking, and it's just not, it's just not in the parking garages, but the new technologies that are out there as far as the pay stations and stuff. So we've talked about it.
Okay.
But we don't have a recommendation at this time.
Certainly something I'm really interested in. And then back to the airport, we've been talking about marketing that property. I don't know what budget that would be included in, but.
That's not in this airport improvement fund at this point.
Okay.
Probably the general fund.
Okay.
With other economic development expenses.
Okay.
And Vice Mayor, if I may, we'll be coming forward hopefully later this year with maybe an RFP or a request to issue an RFP or an RFQ for a more comprehensive look at the whole parking system in the core area.
Oh,
so
that'd be great.
that may be a good time to have that discussion.
Okay, cool, thank you.
But if there's gonna be changes, should that not be part of the budget discussion?
Well, if we don't know what those changes are, then we can't really budget for them. And really, I think the plan, if we get a comprehensive plan or a strategic plan for the parking system, that would be what would probably drive those budget changes. So that, it may be, if it's added revenue, then it could be treated probably as a mid-year budget adjustment if we needed to do that and expend that revenue. Otherwise, it would probably be addressed through the 2018 budget.
I think we're on to the stormwater utility slide. Okay, so in stormwater utility, we are asking for the addition of 2 employees there. We've got, I can't even tell you how many miles of pipe out there. And the way we find problems is when they fail. They collapse, and we have maybe 1 or 2 failures a year. And we have to go out, and it's basically, we luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had anybody hurt. A lot of those are in streets. The street will collapse underneath. It'll usually happen before or after a storm when the stormwater lines are full. This will also help utilities as far as cross connection. They find several a year where the storm sewer is punched into the sanitary, or the sanitary is punched into the storm sewer, and that will help us with some of that infiltration there as well. So we'd like to put together a crew that would basically go out and they'd monitor, do video of all the lines, see what conditions they are, start a more proactive approach to maintaining that infrastructure. Right now it's basically wait until it fails and then we'll see what we can do. We had a big one fail. It was a couple years ago over when we were doing the Pennsylvania-Delaware Street project. We tried to tie in there over by the old KPL Quonset hut, and the whole area just fell, and a 72-inch storm sewer line just fell underneath the equipment. Nobody was hurt and everything was fine, but it was like $100,000 immediate repair that we had to do. So anyway, it would help get that out. Increases utility locates, we share that with utilities as well. So in some capital outlay, there's a lot of equipment that we buy out of this fund. Dump trucks, street sweepers. If we get the additional crew, we would need the storm sewer video inspection unit. And then a couple projects that we want to get done, 13th and Brook, and some culvert lining, which is part of that additional crew that we would have. We are going to ask for a 3% increase in this fund. The last increase we had was in 2003. So it was, and we're only asking for 3% on a $4 ERU, which is 12 cents per ERU. So it's not huge, but I know every dollar counts.
Does Echo Flow under this fund?
What was that?
The Echo Flow, Eco Flow?
No, that's utility. That's the
Okay.
utility program. Not much going on with farmland remediation fund. You'll see a slight decrease there. Alan Rogers, we were able to hire him after the city took on farmland. He did a great job. He retired, pretty much got us pretty much done with the closure. And now what we've got to do is maintain and monitor, and we're doing that with a half-time person downstairs. So the capital improvement fund, that is all the intergovernmental funds that we hope to get next year. It includes our CLINK, it's from KDOT, our CLINK funds, about $300,000. It includes $725,000 from the FAA for the wildlife fence. It includes, what is that, $400,000 from Douglas County for a chiller, boiler, and building stabilization for the health department building. About $1 million from KDOT for Castle and Wakarusa. About $750,000 from Douglas County for reconstruction of 19th from Harper to O'Connell. The CDBG GAP program, and $136,000 from the FAA for reconstruction of the apron at the terminal apron at the airport. So we're expecting about $3.2 million in intergovernmental funds.
The public health improvements, or I should say upgrades or maintenance and
Maintenance.
repair. Is that coming out of the countywide sales tax, the same sales tax that paid to build that building? That's something I'm interested in pursuing.
For 2017, there will not be a countywide sales tax fund. It's being combined in with the general fund. And so there'll be expenditures out of the general fund, but I think in particular, I think there's some debt funding for some of those projects
Yeah.
that you're talking about. So,
And then half of it's coming, it's split 50-50 with Douglas County, so. Oh, and then we have the health department. We do have one full-time staff person over there. Yes. So the personnel services for that is basically increased because of the healthcare. We're assuming that the health department's budget request will be the same as it was last year. I haven't received that yet. And just some increases for janitorial supplies to reflect actual historical costs, so.
We contract those janitor services out.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that was an issue a few months ago. Maybe, I think it was before you were here. We were concerned about what they were being paid and looking at perhaps bringing them in as actual employees of the city instead of contract. I don't know if that's something that's still being discussed or not.
I can't remember.
I actually watched that meeting, and we have had those discussions internally, but at this point, the decision has not been made to go inside.
What is the personal services there in the Public Works Health Department?
That's our maintenance person. We have
Okay, but
one.
that's personal service, not contractual services.
Yeah,
We have one.
Yeah, we do have one employee.
there is both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
that's a person that's dedicated to taking care of more than just cleaning, more than just janitorial, building.
So there's one city employee and everything else is contractual?
And he does general facility maintenance, not necessarily cleaning. He doesn't do the cleaning. So light bulbs, doors, locks, whatever they need as far as the facility. And then he maintains all the heating and air systems, electrical systems, general maintenance.
I know there was some issue
Grounds.
about cleaning the health department building, that our subcontractors weren't perhaps doing it to the level of, I don't want to say hygiene, but I don't know what other word to use.
We've reviewed those and discussed them with the city manager, and like you said, we haven't made a decision as to how that's going to be. We've discussed that with Bert Nash too, or what's the gentleman's name? Dave Johnson. Dan
Yeah.
Johnson. Yeah.
So that personnel service, for that personal service, is that, you said that's one employee, so their pay is at $76,000 for one?
He's been with the city for years.
So that's what benefits.
That includes capers, health
Right.
insurance, and all the benefit costs.
Yeah.
It's paid for.
Which is why it's a challenge to shift from private contractual.
Any other questions right now on any of the public works?
I mean, you look, it is on the agenda that Dan did submit a revised budget request.
we'll have a few comments.
Yeah, sure. This is,
You should have in your agenda, and when you read it, you'll see that we're requesting roughly 42,000 over and above last 2016 budget, up to the 713,000. And I've been told to expect level funding. I mean, I see the financial news you got, and when you look at a budget and you get level revenues to balance, you need level expenses. And just to give you some information around where our expenses go, in the budget that you've got in your packet, and when you read it, you'll see that we're plugging in $38,000 for a merit pool. That's around 1.8%
if everyone were to get an average merit increase. And a city portion of that, or 40%. So 1%, a 1% pay increase, if you were to give that to health department employees, a city piece of that would be roughly $10,000. Our health insurance costs are going up. We're funded through the Douglas County Health Insurance Fund, but every year at the beginning of the year, we give them 40% of that cost, and that represents the city share. So when you give us $713,000, we turn around and give about $250,000 of that for health insurance. We budgeted a 4% increase. We've been told by Sarah Plinsky to expect around a 5 to 6% increase. So that 4% is roughly $6,300 in additional expenses. So level revenue, if means, well, we got to reopen our question around salaries, and we got to figure out a way to pay for that health insurance cost. So please keep those things in mind as you balance everything you've got to balance. And we attempt to do great work. We think we do great work. We think we give good value. And we're going to continue to do that regardless of whether it's level funded or, what we ask or something in between. Thanks.
Dan?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I think you were already here earlier when I mentioned the Zika virus.
Yeah.
Which I'm really concerned about, after seeing that map. Is that, when something like that happens, do you get additional funds from the CDC or the state or the county? I'm just in a very broad, general overview of what would happen.
Yeah. Well, the CDC is getting additional Zika funds at a federal level. I'm not expecting they'll trickle down to us, though. That map does show some 80s Egypti here in Lawrence. And in fact, I spoke to the Kansas Biological Survey faculty who does that sampling for the state and is here in one of our city parks. But we need to think about that risk and maybe calm down a little bit, because you need three things to happen. You need to have the mosquito, and I would say it's probably we have it. Nature is, decides that. We need to have an infected person, and we don't have that. And then when and if we do get an infected person, that person has to get bit by the right mosquito, who then has to go bite someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so those three things, to me, say that it's a fairly low risk, and our message of use DEET, drain your water around your home, try to do the common sense things to avoid getting bit by mosquitoes. That's what we can do, and that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But those mosquitoes aren't necessarily going to be at the wastewater treatment plant. They're going to be in trees near rivers.
Right.
That's their natural
I live close
habitat.
to the river too, so maybe that's why I feel particularly concerned.
How close to the river?
Huh?
How close to the river?
Close enough, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Okay, any other questions on any of the public works budgets?
I had a general question that wasn't really for Chuck, I guess, but of course, one of the things that we were looking at was some kind of transportation overseer almost of all of our plans, and whether that's someone within Public Works or not, or someone under the city manager's office, I don't know, but I didn't know if that conversation had taken place yet regarding this budget.
You mean, is this the recommendation that kind of tried to create a mask committee as well?
Yeah, yep.
We're working on that.
We're working on a pretty comprehensive report on all sorts of things that the Pet Bite Task Force came up with. Not only that, I think it's still going to, be driven largely out of Public Works, just considering funding issues. But we're trying to revise some policies regarding sidewalks and, what the procedure would be, and then trying to prioritize some of the bike routes and things like that. So, and we've had a meeting with some of the leadership of that task force, and I think we're pretty much on the same page. But it's a big job for Chuck to pull that all together. But we've had that conversation, and we're working in that direction.
Yeah, excellent.
Do
I
what?
didn't have budget or construction to worry about. I could jump right on it.
What?
I didn't have budget or construction projects going on. I could jump right on it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay, Parks and Rec.
Hello, Mayor, Commissioners, Ernie Shaw, Parks and Recreation. Obviously, the overview, the main fund that has some explanation, I think, is our general operating fund. So we can go to that. And most of this you are aware of. Obviously, this is our parks, forestry, landscaping, cemeteries, our athletic maintenance, everything that supports our recreation programs and things come out of this, our trails. But in the personnel services, obviously, like everyone else, there's some of that as the healthcare being put in. And also remember the $340,500 Emerald Ash Borer that was transferred in from the sales tax. We have 3 positions out of that 340,000 that has changed that. The contractual services, that 146, the majority of that is also out of that 340,000 of Emerald Ash. And then obviously the big 4,678% increase in capital outlay. Again, you're aware of that. That's our infrastructure maintenance repair, previously expended from their sales tax reserve fund that is now being budgeted and left in our general fund that is showing up there. So primarily that is the differences that you're seeing there in that fund. The next fund, our sales tax or our guest tax, that's basically our downtown. There's 2 full-time people there, and that's paid out of that along with our plants that we put downtown. So that's primarily that fund, and that's more or less unchanged. Our recreation fund is obviously our next big fund. We have the hundreds of programs, our sports, our rec facilities, our aquatics, our nature center, all the operations that come out of that. Again, the major change there, again, is the personnel. And like everybody else, as we've talked about, is the contingency. That is not being budgeted as part of that, so you'll see that big drop in that. So no major changes there. We will be talking, obviously, next week about some of the revenue type stuff and some changes and some ideas there, but that's for another meeting. Our special rec fund, the 216 fund, the alcohol account, again, status quo. That fund is used for a lot of different things that we have, including some of the expenses reflected in this fund is the Lawrence Arts Center, the outdoor downtown sculpture exhibition, the concerts at South Park, the bicycle pedal plant. A lot of those things come out of that fund also. But again, that is unchanged. Then our golf course, the big change here is primarily in our capital outlay. We're looking at a $50,000 because we think that it's time to do some renovations out there on clubhouse improvements. And just this year, in July, I believe, Brian, that our debt service from the original debt pays off this July. But what we're anticipating here is about a $500,000 addition over 10 years, I think, that we say we can pay for out of our what we make in our funding out there. So that's that one. And then the new fund, basically, we're showing, as Brian said earlier, the grants, the scholarships, the perpetual care funds in that other fund that we're just showing what is anticipated that we know for 2017 in that fund. That's about it. Not a lot of changes.
Ernie, going back to the golf course, the improvements to the clubhouse, do you have any idea what the debt service payments are gonna be on that?
Go ahead.
I told her to go ahead and put 50,000 a year. And that's what the difference is there, is 50,000. It doesn't anticipate, and I know we need to sit down and talk a little bit more about that. I believe it was a $500,000 suggested, or that's what you were talking about.
Right.
That's actually a 15-year debt. I rounded up a little bit for that debt payment to be 50,000. But again, that's in there based on their projection that that is the amount of revenue that they believe they can increase by having the additional space. And so that's what I backed into then what the debt payment would need to be and what size of debt they could have on that.
Obviously, one of the concerns that I have about that, Ernie, and you recall better than anybody when the golf course was first put in, I mean, it was unable, if I remember right, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it was unable to make its debt payments at the time until we moved it into sales tax, is being able to make those payments. So, you know, I understand things are changing a little bit in the golf world here in town, and you know, we're anticipating our revenue to pick up just because of the number of players. But I guess just to let you know, I'm a little bit apprehensive about expecting us to be able to make those payments out of the increase in revenues because we weren't able to do it before, even though that we were sold with the idea that it could make it. So just to let you know that.
Well, and I'll follow up with that. Tom and I actually had the conversation today on any of these bigger CIP items. They're still going to be vetted through, for instance, this one will be a case, we'll sit down and I want to see a business case study for it and maybe even bring someone in from outside. Also, no offense to your staff, but I think before we issue bonds with anticipating that the revenue from it will cover it, we'll want to just make sure we go through that. For the same reason you're saying, we don't want to come back then, in this case, in the general fund, to subsidize the debt payment in the golf fund. So this will come back.
Yeah, just because it's included in the budget doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion. Major projects will be reviewed by us prior to bond issuance, but even after that, looking at the scopes of work on the design of these things, understanding if it's an operation like this, if there's a business case to support it, as was suggested as a part of this review. So I think that's something that the management staff is familiar with and expects to have happen as we go forward.
And that business case is something that we are currently working on, and there's a number of things that is starting to mix into this that could generate revenue for us that obviously we're not ready to talk about at this point, but that's part of that study that we're doing, and hopefully we'll be able to present that when the time is due.
I just bring up the history of it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all know.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things too that rubs me the wrong way, and I've talked to Tom about this, is that we don't have a clear view of the golf course fund, because people's salaries come out of it that, like yours, I think, no offense, but if we need to somehow have, that moved out so we have a good, clear picture of the golf fund and what it is or is not making, I think that would be really helpful to me.
I think we've tried to get closer to the cost of the operations by those allocations, but we can add more specificity so you understand what's being charged there, what isn't.
Well, these numbers are great, compared to, what they were, so, And, if we go out there and look at the facility, the facility is fantastic. Change and has gone over time, and it is pretty spectacular for a public golf course, so.
It is.
We're to be proud of that.
I might add one note on this budget. You're only looking at half of it, because on the revenue side, we basically add 50,000 of revenue, 50,000 of expense. So if we don't do it, we just take them off both sides and do it operating as normal. So this is just an opportunity to look at it for the future.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Scott, planning, Development Services.
Yes, sir. Scott McCullough, Planning Director. This overview slide may be a bit misleading in the percent change. I'll cover that. Our budget represents about 4% of the total city budget. That's primarily salaries, some vehicles, office overhead, and training. We have 38 FTEs. 32.85 of those are funded by the general fund. 5.15 of those are funded by 4 grant funds that we administer. And the deceiving part, if you go back one slide, is that 1,000% increase or whatever. As I understand it, we're starting to account better for the grant funds. The actual, if you take out personal service increases for the PDS department, it's really only a 1.1% increase in operating budget that we're seeking. Slide 2. So this is the general fund, the general operating fund for PDS. And again, it's about 1.1%. There are just a few things that are reflected in that. One is that we are reclassifying 2 positions, 2 inspector positions. One would remain an admin rental inspector position, admin position in that, and one would go to a senior building inspector. We're also going to present to you an increase in our revenue in the form of a commercial building permit plan review fee that would actually cover that senior building inspector position. The major part of the 1.1% increase is putting general fund dollars, about $50,000 of general fund dollars, to our CDBG home staff, our community development division staff that are working outside of the scope of the federal funds on some important issues for the community. And I would remind you that the county funds 1/6 of the planning division budget. Next slide. So this is just a very quick rundown of our grant funds. This is our transportation planning fund that funds the MPO. The projected funds for 2017 would be about $325,000. $260,000 of the federal grant, and about $65,000 it would be the 20% match that we are required to do to administer that grant. That's a little bit of an increase over the years because every 5 years we're required to do a major 5-year annual or 5-year review of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That occurs in 2017. Next slide. The CDBG block grant you're familiar with, it's projected that in 2017 that's $940,000. We are allowed to withhold a maximum of 20% of that grant for administrative cost, and we do that routinely, and that really covers, that's the primary salary basis for 3 positions in that grant program. Slide 5 is our home program, also administered by our community development division. That's money spent primarily on affordable housing activities. So for example, our tenant-based rental assistance program that the Housing Authority uses, first-time home buyer subsidy that Tenants to Homeowners administers, and a minimum of 15% has to be set aside each year to build new units. An example of that is Cedarwood Cottages last year. And so the projected home grant and program income for 2017 there is $530,000. And then our last slide is the Emergency Solutions Grant. That's projected to be about $155,000 for 2017, and that's 100% pass-through. That goes to organizations such as Willow, Lawrence Community Shelter, Catholic Charities, and the like. So that's the PDS overview.
One thing I was thinking of from our city commission goals, of course, non-motorized transportation is one of them. And we're adding sidewalks, out of so many different departments and budgets. What might be really helpful is if we have some kind of breakdown of our city commission goals and just showing, what we're achieving for each goal. That would be really helpful because people, ask me, what are we doing about sidewalks? And I'm like, I don't know, let me get 20 different funds that we're doing sidewalks out of, including federal money. So
yeah. It might be a good time to say that the transportation dollars we get are strictly planning dollars. You can't put any of that group of money on the ground in terms of projects.
I thought the CDBG grants could fund those.
The CDBG grants can fund sidewalks. In fact, that's one of the funds that we talk about, sidewalk gap. funds. It's been about $100,000 to $120,000 a year, I think, over the last few years.
So when we get into strategic planning, and we get a strategic plan adopted, we will match major expenditures to your individual strategic plan goals. And so you'll see all of that. It'll be locked in for you.
That'd be great.
Then we'll do a report that will quarterly come out, and that report will have all of those, and it'll show the progress on everything that you've asked us.
That's gonna be awesome.
So you'll see that, and we'll put it out there on the net. Everybody will be able to see what you're achieving, what you're accomplishing. It'll all be lined up, a nice little matrix for you.
Yeah.
And it just ties in with the strategic plan, the budget document, all the way to employee performance evaluations.
Wow.
So it runs all the way through the organization.
Excellent. Yeah, measurable outcomes is really good. Anything that we can give.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Well, we've got about 16 minutes before our official meeting starts.
Are we gonna go to summary pages?
We probably could. I figured we would do that as part of our discussion.
I had a question on that.
Okay, well, go ahead.
The contingency is shown there on the summary at $4.5 million roughly. And I was just curious where that was coming from, because the previous contingencies was fund balance in 2016. And I noticed that there were some contingency lines through there, and I just wanted to get a better idea what that was in 2017.
And so for instance, you would have seen some in the recreation budget.
Right. Yeah.
In those cases, those are truly contingency.
Okay.
Trying to get down to what that is. For instance, if a new program is thought of in the middle of the year, of, oh, hey, people are asking for this program, we want to get this program
So
going
that's a
before
way
the
to be
revenue starts.
responsive, even though we're, 12 months out from actually spending that money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's been some, it's department by department debate with the finance director whether or not there's still a contingency in there, to be honest.
Right.
So
But
that's
it's not fund balance.
No, it's not fund
Which is
balance.
what it was.
The
shown.
remaining amount of contingency in there is in the debt service fund.
Okay.
We're issuing debt this coming fall, but from time to time. So the big one actually is definitive debt for the business park. It's not in there necessarily because we haven't, they're still temporary notes, but then if we go ahead and we're going to issue bonds for it, I want to make sure that we, in that case, it is a contingency that the debt service payments are available to pay for it. So the debt service fund will have a contingency, and then some of those other operating funds will. But fund balance is not.
Right.
Any other questions right now?
That's really helpful.
I'm amazed at the work you guys have done. This is just
Yeah, it's
awesome.
impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Mike, just for a moment, you should thank Brian, Brandon, Casey, and Danielle. Danielle was a huge help.
Yeah.
And of course,
Yeah.
Diane is always there to
Yeah.
help mentor. This had nothing to do with me,
Yeah.
okay?
But,
This had everything to do with the staff that was here and the message that you gave them as to what you wanted to see. So that's who
Yeah.
gets the
Well,
credit.
I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. This is a huge help for me as I try to understand what is going on with city finance and what we're looking at for the future. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate your work.
And if no one wants it, I'm taking that home.
I was gonna take it home because I can actually read it.
Okay, well, let's go take a few minute break and then we'll
Okay.
start up again, okay?
Are we still
I really
sitting
hope that
down
ends up in your living room.
You know what?
I mean.
Think about doing that.